I gripped the leather armrest of my dad's chair so tight my nails nearly tore through it. My brother, Dylan, sat across from me, legs sprawled out like he owned the place, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass like he was auditioning for a mob movie. Mom? Victoria, as I'd started thinking of her in my head, was perched on the couch, swirling her wine like she was too busy to care. "Haley, sweetie, let's be rational about this," she droned, the same way she might if I'd overcooked the turkey on Thanksgiving. As if they hadn't just handed my entire future over to Dylan like a side dish. Dylan, of course, was eating this up. He had that smug, Wall Street reject smirk that made me want to shove his whiskey down his throat. My throat burned as I tried to swallow down the lump rising there. "So, just to be clear," I said, my voice disturbingly steady, "the trust fund Grandpa set up for my education, so I could go to law school, the thing I've been busting my ass for my entire life. That money is now Dylan's?" Mom exhaled dramatically, like I'd asked her to explain how Wi-Fi works. "Dylan's business needs the capital, Haley. We made a family decision."
Oh.
"A family decision," I repeated, and something inside me cracked wide open. Dad, who'd been silent until now, finally looked up from his iPad, clearly annoyed this was taking longer than his usual morning stock check. "Don't be dramatic. Law isn't a real career for a woman. You'll get married, have kids, and you won't need some fancy degree for that. You should be thanking us." I don't know what hit me harder, the betrayal or the casual way he dismissed my entire existence. Like my years of late-night studying, my scholarships, my straight-A record, they meant nothing. I turned to Dylan, who at least had the decency to fake an apologetic shrug. "Business is expensive, sis. But hey, when I make it big, I'll send you a check or something."
A check.
I stared at him. At all of them. My family. Or at least the people I used to believe were my family. Mom sighed and patted my knee like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "You'll understand one day, honey." That's when I knew. I would never understand. I would never be okay with this. I would never be part of their family again. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the hardwood. My hands were shaking, but I refused to let them see me break. "Well," I said, my voice sharper than the crystal glassware Dylan was so proud of, "I hope it was worth it. Because after today, I'm done." Dad barely looked up. Mom clicked her tongue. Dylan chuckled. And just like that, I walked out the front door, past Dad's overpriced golf clubs, Mom's unnecessary designer rug, and Dylan's ridiculous collection of whiskey bottles, knowing I would never step foot in that house again. The first few weeks after I walked out of that house felt like a fever dream. I went from silk sheets and catered dinners to a one-bedroom apartment where the plumbing sounded like it was auditioning for a horror movie. My mattress was on the floor, my fridge was mostly empty except for a half-drunk bottle of soda and a questionable jar of peanut butter, and I was living off gas station coffee and discount ramen. But I was free. 2 jobs, 4 hours of sleep a night, and just enough money to scrape by. Mornings were spent hustling shifts at a diner where I served eggs to construction workers who barely looked up from their newspapers. Nights were at a steakhouse where rich guys left tips that could cover my groceries for a week, when they weren't too busy trying to impress their dates with the wine list. The only thing keeping me sane was Brooke, my best friend since high school, the one who had always believed in me when no one else did. She'd show up at my place with takeout, roll her eyes at my disaster of an apartment, and remind me why I was doing this in the first place. "One day you'll be running this city, Haley, and I'll be right there to remind you how broke you used to be." I wanted to believe her, but most nights, exhaustion won over hope. My feet ached, my back screamed, and my dreams of law school felt further away than ever. Then one night at the steakhouse, everything changed. I was clearing a table near the bar when Logan Wells, one of our regulars, waved me over. I recognized him immediately. He always came in looking like he stepped straight out of a Wall Street power meeting, all tailored suits and expensive cologne. "You ever think about working in law?" he asked, completely out of the blue. I nearly dropped the tray in my hands. Of course, I'd thought about it. I thought about it every single day. But what was I supposed to say? That I was a law school reject slinging stakes to pay rent? He slid a business card across the table. Come by my office on Monday. We need interns. Paid ones. I stared at the card like it might disappear if I blinked. Logan Wells wasn't just some guy with money. He was a senior partner at one of the biggest firms in the city. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like some distant fantasy. It felt real. Something I could actually reach out and grab. I tucked the card into my apron and walked back to the kitchen, my hands still shaking. Maybe, just maybe, my life was about to change. Walking into Logan's firm on my first day felt like stepping onto the set of some high-budget legal drama. The lobby alone was bigger than my entire apartment, and everything, from the polished marble floors to the modern art sculptures, screamed money. The kind of money my family had, but apparently I wasn't worth investing in. I adjusted my blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped inside, knowing this was my shot. The shot they never wanted me to have. The first week was brutal. I was juggling my shifts at the steakhouse, trying to absorb every legal term I could, and pretending I wasn't running on 3 hours of sleep and caffeine fumes. The other interns were fresh out of Ivy League schools, well-rested, and probably had never worked a double shift in their lives. But I kept my head down and did the work. Late nights at the office, early mornings at the diner. Every time my eyelids felt too heavy, I reminded myself, this is the chance they tried to steal from you. Brooke made sure I didn't completely lose my mind. She'd barge into my apartment with takeout and force me to take at least one night off. You're turning into a corporate zombie, Haley. At least let me drag you to a happy hour so you can pretend to have a life. I laughed it off, but deep down, I was exhausted. What if I couldn't keep up? What if Logan realized he'd made a mistake hiring me? The pressure was crushing, but I wasn't about to give my family the satisfaction of watching me fail. Then, just when I started to feel like I was getting a grip on things, my phone buzzed. Dylan. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. Mom's been crying because you don't answer her calls. Stop being selfish. I stared at the message, waiting for that familiar guilt to creep in. But this time, nothing. No anger, no sadness, just clarity. Selfish?
Right.
Because fighting for my own future after they tossed me aside was selfish. Because putting myself first for once was a crime. I locked my phone and got back to work. I had a future to build, and I wasn't about to waste another second looking back. 5 years later, I wasn't just surviving, I was killing it. The broke girl living on gas station coffee and sheer stubbornness? Yeah, she was a relic of the past. I had finished law school, passed the bar, and earned my place in one of the most respected firms in the city. Now, my name actually meant something. Senior partners nodded when they passed me in the hall. Associates double-checked their work before handing it to me. Logan himself started pulling me into big cases, trusting me with clients who had more zeros in their bank accounts than I'd ever seen in my life. The long nights, the insane deadlines, the stress? Worth it. Then, on an otherwise ordinary morning, while sipping an overpriced espresso and skimming my inbox, I saw the headline that nearly made me choke. Dylan Carter. SEC investigating Carter Capital for fraudulent trading. I stared at the screen, rereading every word like they might magically change if I blinked hard enough. Misappropriated funds. Fake investments. Insider trading. The kind of financial disaster that sent people to prison. The kind of scandal that could burn an entire family's reputation to the ground. And let's be real, Dylan was about as cut out for a prison cell as a house cat in the wild. I scrolled through the article, watching my family's carefully crafted image unravel in real time. Dad's name wasn't in the piece, but I knew better. He'd always been the puppet master, making sure Dylan never got his hands dirty. Until now. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I sighed, grabbed it off my desk, and answered, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Haley. The voice on the other end was barely above a whisper, a mix of desperation and straight-up fear. We need your help. Dylan. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of pretending I didn't exist, except for the occasional guilt-trip texts about Mom. And now they needed me. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my fingers against my desk. For the first time in a long time, I had the upper hand. Well, I muttered, more to myself than to him. This should be interesting. Driving up to the Carter estate felt surreal. 3 years ago, I had walked out of that house with nothing but my pride, and now, here I was, pulling into the circular driveway in a car I bought with my own money, wearing a suit that said I belonged in rooms they never wanted me in. The place hadn't changed. Same towering columns, same manicured hedges, same ridiculous fountain Dad installed to impress people who didn't actually like him. But I had changed. And this time, I wasn't the one feeling small. Walking through those double doors, I half expected some dramatic thunderstorm to roll in behind me. Instead, I was met with silence, thick, uncomfortable, and laced with desperation. Mom stood at the foot of the grand staircase, still polished to perfection, but her tight grip on the railing gave her away. Dad was in his leather armchair, Scotch glass in hand like it was a life vest. Dylan slouched in the corner, looking like a washed-up version of himself. "We need your help, Haley." Mom's voice was smooth, but even she knew there was no sugarcoating this. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before stepping further inside. "You mean you need my law degree? Let's not pretend this is some heartwarming family reunion." Dad exhaled, rubbing his temple. "The SEC investigation is bleeding us dry. We need someone competent, someone we can trust." I barked out a laugh. "Trust? That's rich, coming from you." Dylan finally looked up. "Come on, Hale. We're family. This isn't just about the company, it's about us." I tilted my head. "Funny. Family didn't seem to mean much when you handed over my trust fund and told me to figure it out." Mom took a step forward, like she thought proximity would soften me. "Tell us what you want." I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. Full control over the legal strategy. My own team. My rates. And 51% of the company. Dad's grip tightened around his glass. Mom's nails dug into her palm. Dylan looked like someone had punched him in the gut. For the first time in my life, they were the ones squirming. And damn, it felt good. Dad's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen since the last time the stock market tanked. His grip tightened around his Scotch glass, and for a second, I thought he might throw it. "You can't just take the company, Haley. That's not how this works." I leaned back in my chair, as relaxed as if I were discussing the weather. "I'm not taking anything. I'm saving it. Unless, of course, you'd rather let Dylan handle this himself?" Pretty sure he wouldn't last a week in a federal jumpsuit, but hey, your call. Dylan shifted uncomfortably, staring at his hands like they held the answers to life's problems. Mom pursed her lips, a silent warning in her expression, but I wasn't about to let up. Dad slammed his glass onto the table. "This is blackmail." I raised an eyebrow. "No, this is business. And you of all people should respect that." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Dad hated losing, but he hated losing to me even more. I stood up, straightening my blazer with slow precision. "You've got 24 hours to decide. After that, I walk, and you can explain to the board why Carter Capital is officially toast." I turned and walked out, not giving them the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. The next day, my phone rang. "Dad." I let it go to voicemail, just to make him sweat. 5 minutes later, he called again. "We'll agree to your terms. But there's one condition." I exhaled, already knowing I wasn't going to like this. "Go on. You're going to teach Dylan the business." I closed my eyes, biting back a laugh. Of course. Even now, Dad still couldn't fully hand over control without keeping Dylan in the picture. I let the silence stretch before answering. "Fine. But he follows my lead. No shortcuts, no special treatment. He works for everything." Dad hesitated, then sighed. "Deal." I hung up, staring at my phone for a second. If Dylan thought this was going to be easy, he was in for the shock of his life. Taking control of Carter Capital was like trying to rebuild a sinking ship while the crew still argued over who should be in charge. The first thing I did was rip out the old policies like weeds, outdated procedures, pointless meetings, the old boys club mentality that had let the company rot from the inside. If they wanted to survive, they were going to do it my way. Dylan, to his credit, showed up. I expected him to half-ass it, to find ways to coast while I did the real work. Instead, he put in the hours. He shadowed meetings, pored over financial reports, even stayed late trying to untangle the mess he had inherited. But was it real? Or was this just another one of Dylan's acts? One where he played the role of the reformed screw-up long enough to get what he wanted? I didn't have time for blind faith. I watched him like a hawk. Every deal, every contract, every move he made, I double-checked it all. He asked questions. He didn't cut corners. He even stopped wearing those overpriced loafers and started showing up in actual work shoes. Small changes, but they added up. And just when I started to believe, when I let my guard slip even slightly, I found it. A single email, buried in an old archive folder. From Dylan to Logan Wells. Dated 5 years ago. A request. A desperate, almost pleading message asking Logan to take a chance on me because he knew our family never would. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. This wasn't the Dylan I remembered, the smug, entitled golden boy who let me walk away without a second thought. This was someone who, in his own way, had been in my corner all along. I shut the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let out a slow breath. If he had done this, then what else didn't I know? For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure who the real villain was. The turnaround at Carter Capital was something out of a corporate redemption arc. Within months, we stabilized the business, cleaned up the books, and got clients to stop side-eyeing us like we were running a Ponzi scheme. Investors came back, cautiously at first, but soon enough, money was flowing, and for the first time in years, the company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Then, just when I let myself breathe, life threw another punch. Dad collapsed in his office. Stress, decades of bad habits, and sheer stubbornness finally caught up with him. By the time I got to the hospital, Mom was pacing the waiting room like a caged animal, gripping a styrofoam coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Dylan sat in the corner, head in his hands, his usual smug confidence nowhere to be found. The doctors said he'd make it, but it wasn't lost on any of us that this was a wake-up call. A sign that the old ways weren't just toxic, they were deadly. And that left me with a choice. I could walk away. The company was solid. My name was clear. I could let them deal with their own mess while I built something for myself. And for a moment I wanted to. Hell, the old me would have. But I wasn't her anymore. So I made my terms. First, full control. No more boardroom battles, no more shady backroom deals. If they wanted me to save this family, they were doing it on my terms. Second, transparency. No more secrets, no more missing numbers in the books. I wasn't going to spend my life putting out fires I didn't start. Third, Dylan. If he was serious about stepping up, he had to prove it. No more easy outs. He either learned how to run a legitimate business, or he was out for good. When Dad finally woke up, weak but alive, he didn't argue. Maybe for the first time in his life, he got it. The power had shifted. And just like that, the past stopped defining me. I wasn't just fixing Carter Capital anymore. I was making it my own. Dad wasn't the kind of man to admit he was wrong. But sitting across from me in his hospital bed, looking pale and worn down, he seemed different. Not weak, just human. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he finally said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. Fighting for a place at the table. Refusing to back down. A part of me wanted to roll my eyes. Another part, the one that still carried the sting of every time he dismissed me, wanted to bite back with something sharp. But instead, I just nodded. Because for the first time, he wasn't lecturing me. He was acknowledging me. A week later, the family lawyer reached out. They were restoring my trust fund. Every dollar they had once deemed better suited for Dylan was now back in my hands. I could have taken the money and walked away. Bought a penthouse, invested it, built a life that had nothing to do with Carter Capital. But that would have been too easy. Instead, I did something none of them expected. I used the money to start a foundation, one that would help women break into the legal world. Scholarships, mentorship programs, actual funding for those fighting to claim a seat at the table. Because if my own family wasn't going to bet on women, I damn sure would. Dylan caught me off guard, too. The old him would have laughed at the idea of working under me. This version? He showed up. He listened. He asked questions. He actually worked. So I did something no one saw coming. I made him CFO. Not because of his last name, not because he was family, but because, for the first time, he wasn't coasting on our name. He was proving himself. When I announced it, Dad just nodded. No argument. No resentment. Just a quiet understanding. The power struggle was over. And for the first time, it felt like we were building something real. Sunday dinner at the Carter house used to feel like a high-stakes poker game, expensive wine, forced smiles, and an unspoken competition for who could land the most passive-aggressive remark. But this time it was different. I walked through the door, and for the first time, I wasn't the underdog. I wasn't here to prove anything. I had already won. Mom greeted me with a careful smile. Dad, still recovering but as sharp as ever, gave me a nod from his seat at the head of the table. Dylan stood by the bar, pouring himself a drink, bourbon neat. Want one? He asked, holding up the bottle. I smirked. Only if you've finally figured out how to make an old-fashioned that doesn't taste like gasoline. The conversation over dinner felt normal. No tension, no strategic jabs disguised as advice. We talked business, my foundation, Dylan's CFO role, Dad's so-called retirement that we all knew would last maybe 3 months. For the first time, no one questioned if I belonged at the table. But as the night went on, something settled in me. For years, I thought justice meant making them regret every time they had underestimated me. That real victory meant watching them squirm, seeing them acknowledge just how wrong they had been. But sitting there, watching my father actually listen, seeing Dylan own up to his responsibilities, I realized something. The real win wasn't revenge. It was building something better. I wasn't just part of Carter Capital now. I was reshaping it, making it into something built on merit, not nepotism. Something that, years from now, wouldn't need a fight for survival every time the old ways caught up to it. By the time dessert rolled around, Mom raised her glass. To new beginnings. And for the first time, I raised mine without hesitation. To new beginnings, indeed.